So good morning, everyone. My name is Justin Schroeder. I'm the chair of the New Zealand Tech Marketers Group, and delighted to welcome you to today's webinar, which is all about the surge of generative AI content and how we can, as copywriters and creatives, build a kick-ass content strategy. Your host for today is the wonderful Caroline Francis, who's on our exec team, and I am going to pause myself and hand over to Caroline to introduce you to our panel today, and I'll be watching for any questions and things like that that come up. But on behalf of us, thank you very much for spending an hour with us, and I hope you find this incredibly useful.
Great. Thank you, Justin. As Justin mentioned, I'm a founding executive member of the Tech Marketers Group, and in my spare time, I'm a virtual CMO for technology companies here and overseas. And as a B2B marketer, I know that the art of selling is all in storytelling beforehand, right before the sale, and that's where great content comes in. So to help me explore the topic that Justin outlined, joining me today are three amazingly talented content specialists, all with a love of words, and actually who I've had the privilege of working with in some level of capacity over the last few years. So I'm excited to have them with me today. But before we start, I'd just like to ask if you're not speaking, just so we can see our speakers, could you turn your video off maybe and mute, and then we're going to have a question and answer time at the end, just so we can see our panelists today in the session. So let me introduce you to our learned panel. So first up is Monica Shepherd. Monica is a copywriter and messaging strategist from Mark My Words. With an understanding of SEO, copywriting, storytelling techniques, ethical persuasion, and biopsychology, Monica helps brands craft digital content and brand stories that attract their ideal clients. She's worked with B2B and B2C organizations, from startups to global corps, with a focus on creating high-performing digital content that helps brands sell through genuine connection. So a very smart cookie in all things content. Thanks for joining us, Monica. Next up, we're joined by Max Johns, and Max is the head of digital marketing at SiteHost, who is the largest New Zealand-owned provider of cloud and web hosting. For nearly 20 years, Max has worked at the intersection of content strategy and marketing, but professes to cross the street every now and then. So thanks for joining me, Max.
Thank you.
And last but by no means least, I'd like to welcome Caitlin Sisley. Caitlin is the senior content writer at DroneDeploy, where she specializes in writing about robotics, super fun, reality capture, and also automation. She has over a decade of content strategy and copywriting experience for B2B and technology businesses, both here in New Zealand and also in the UK. So welcome to our discussion, Caitlin. So if you have a question as we go through the discussion, as Justin mentioned, he's going to be looking out for those. Please drop your question in the chat and we'll answer those a bit later on. So now down to business. Max, we'll start with you. I'd really appreciate your thoughts on the role of content as part of an integrated marketing strategy and how content maps into kind of brand overall.
I think that what people have been realizing more and more is that content is the fundamental part of any brand. And I think that the fact that we're using digital content more is what's made people realize that, because it's easier to make it, faster to publish it, easier to make mistakes with it in some ways as well. And so the role of content is really to express that brand, to be something that the brand inhabits as well. Marketing, I think, used to divide content away from some things. Advertising wasn't considered content, for example. And now that content marketing is a pretty classic way of going about things, we're really seeing those two things integrated a lot more closely. So I don't think it's possible anymore to separate marketing and content, even if people would have tried to do that a few years ago.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so if we agree that content plays a role in the B2B marketing mix, Monica, what does a great content strategy look like, and who should be involved in creating that?
Yeah, okay, so a few things. Content strategy, it has goals that are aligned to the bigger picture business goals. So you know what you're always trying to achieve with your content, and you're working to a plan rather than just kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall. However, it's not necessarily all campaign driven as such. Content is also about building relationships and trust and providing that value and practical knowledge. And I think with that in mind, content strategy also understands personas, as in their needs and their motivations and their interests, and how to support that need for knowledge at different stages of the journey, or those stages of consideration as well. So what content works best at which stage of consideration, but I think also remembering that isn't necessarily linear. It's not just a linear journey. And I like to use that Hero Hub hygiene approach. So you've also always got that always on strategy as well as some of that high impact stuff. But I also think that knowing your audience also means knowing where they're hanging out. So therefore, content strategy is also about understanding the channels and the distribution. And that's a point as well, right? Is that content strategy is as much about distribution and amplification. Amplification is like pushing the content out as much as it is about creating it. So making that as much as part of your strategy is kind of what you're producing. Content strategy, I think it needs to be differentiated. So I would normally suggest kind of around 5 key content pillars that you like hang your hat on as a brand. And I think when you're really clear about that positioning, then it's a lot easier to stay consistent with your content calendar, but also be prepared to flex to the sentiment of your audience as you need to. And I think that's a part of strategy as well. So being like willing to agile enough to actually listen to your audience and be able to respond accordingly as well. So it's good to have that plan and that strategy, like that essentially a content calendar aligned with that strategy, but the ability to flex, I think, comes down to being really clear around, what are your key messages. And as for like who was involved, I think obviously depending on your business, there are going to be, sorry, the lawnmower man has just turned up outside my window. Classic timing. I think that obviously there's different functions within the business who can actually provide really valuable insights and should provide really valuable insights to that content strategy. So it's not just the responsibility of like a marketing team. If you want that really differentiated content, then you need that nuanced perspective and insight from your sales teams, like the people who are having conversations with your customers, your CX or CS teams who are answering those FAQs or responding to the challenges that come up for your customers. And obviously your leadership team, so having them kind of be invested in leading conversations within the industry and sharing those really insightful points of views and experience as well. So that kind of collaborative input from everyone.
I'm curious, and I'm going off piste a little bit here, but I'm curious as to the three of you, how often you actually get to speak to an actual customer, like hearing from the customer specifically, feedback or, insights into how that might then affect your content strategy.
Personally, I try to make it an essential in every project. Whether it's kind of through my like voice of customer interviews that I do, or looking at things like reviews or feedback, or getting insights from like customer support calls and that kind of stuff. For a couple of reasons, I think obviously understanding those needs and the motivations and the challenges that keep coming up, but also the language. So what language are they using to describe all those things, their needs and their challenges, because I think if I'm just asking my clients, they're using the language that they use internally, and it's not necessarily the language that their customers are using.
For me, web hosting is the sort of thing that people ideally don't have to think about. So we don't have a heap of customer contact outside of the support team. I've got full access to all the support tickets to read what's coming in there. Literally the only time I've talked directly with customers who were happy to have someone from the company come in and visit was when I turned up with cake at Christmas. So the voice of customer can be a bit difficult when you're kind of at that infrastructure, we like to forget about you kind of level, but being able to see what does come in is really helpful, especially as a reminder of, for us as the nerds behind everything, just how much people don't know compared to us about how servers work and that sort of thing. It can be very easy to fall into your own belief that, what you know is normal. But most people have never wanted to even know what a hypervisor is, let alone try to manage one themselves.
And okay, so strategy is all very well and good, but we know that strategy without execution is really just a great idea. So Caitlin, what do you think about how you translate this great content strategy into a tactical content plan? And how do you know what messaging and themes to add at which stage of that plan?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's important to note that the wrong message at the wrong stage of the buyer journey can not just leave a bad impression, but it can actually cause people to block your communications via email or social media. So in that case, you've lost the prospect forever. So it is really important to deliver the right message at the right time. As Monica said, it's really important to be mapping that buyer journey. So awareness, consideration, decision level. And that's not always linear, but you do the best that you can at mapping it and aligning messaging to those stages. So for example, if I was ready to make a purchase, then I might be willing to read a 30-page technical white paper breaking down the details of a product. But if I run into that straight away, I'm not going to want that. And vice versa, I might be at a stage where I'm looking for really in-depth information and all I can find is a fluffy blog listing 4 reasons why you need this thing. And that's really frustrating as well. And that's something that I've encountered personally as a buyer of various products. So it's really important to align what you're creating to those stages. And I think tactically, Monica mentioned pillars, which is basically, content themes that you create more detailed topics underneath. And I do agree that really helps you to build brand authority, to really focus your SEO in a pointy way in those areas. And also it just helps tactically for you to develop your more detailed topics from there. And I think if you have limited resources, a good approach is to map that buyer journey, do an audit of the content that you already have, identify gaps, and then prioritize those gaps. So what do you need to fill the most urgently? And then you can look at, whether you want to outsource some writing to freelancers or use a tool like AI to speed up your content generation. But it's important to always be refining your approach and testing that messaging is hitting the mark, because you probably won't always get it right the first time.
That's a really great segue. So we know that telling a compelling story to entice a prospect to action is really an art, as you've described. So addressing the elephant in the room, how is the art of storytelling changing through the influence of new technologies like ChatGPT and other large language models? I'm sure we could talk about this all day, but what are your thoughts on this, Max?
I think that first thing that it's done is it's established a baseline. If you want, we were talking Hero Hub hygiene before, if you want classic hygiene content, stuff that you feel like you have to say, and that's pretty much been said before as well, AI is going to give you as good a first draft as an entry-level writer. The moment you need anything that goes beyond that and refers specifically to your products or has any sort of creativity in it, I don't think the tech is anywhere near there. And I think you're going to spend longer through the edit cycle than you would getting a real person involved. Where that can change is when, rather than using one of the publicly available models, you are injecting your own data in. So we've started experimenting with some AI tools internally that can access data that we'd never, paste into a ChatGPT window, and seeing the inferences that can be made there is pretty impressive stuff. The thing that I think we're going to see a lot, the mistake I think we're going to see happen a lot, is going to be people who over-rely on the freely available technology, don't spot the hallucinations, don't bother editing, and we're going to see, like we have before, just a new form of content farming, basically. And I wouldn't be surprised if we'll see SEO updates that attempt to stamp down on that, just like we have with other forms of content farming as well.
So Max, while we're with you, Sophie's just asked a question about what tools you are experimenting with internally for that purpose.
The internal experimentation we've done was based on, I forget which model it was, but I believe it came from Hugging Face. So we've started self-hosting that, but it's a model that we trained on external servers, and then we're hosting it with our own someone's coming through there with our own data involved. So yeah, very different to scraping our servers and chucking it into ChatGPT or anything else like that. There's if you go onto Hugging Face and just see what's out there in terms of models that are ready to be trained, there's already just countless opportunities out there. It's quite incredible.
Interesting. Mon, do you have a perspective on this topic?
Sorry, I missed you there.
Oh, yeah, sorry. And we've got I think Karen, could you please mute? Or Justin, could you mute her? Thanks. Oh, sorry, little bit of disturbance. So with the experimentation of these tools in kind of full force, there's obviously a deluge of content out there, or about to be, as Max said, lots of content farming. How, as marketers, do we cut through that noise, and what makes for a really compelling story these days? Caitlin, I'll throw to you, and then we'll come back to you to have a perspective as well.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was already a deluge of content before ChatGPT, so things are just about to get even crazier. There's going to be loads of recycled, regurgitated content out there, just written with slight variances, and that's not a great experience for anyone on the internet who's seeking actual valuable information. So I think it's really important for us to focus on our strengths as human content marketers and what we still bring to the table, because we do have skills that AI doesn't. And as an example of that, AI can only write about human experiences that have already been written about. It can't draw on those memories, those sensory perceptions, those emotions itself, right? Whereas, as a person, I might remember what it was like going to the movies as a kid, and I might think about the stickiness of the floor and the stale smell of popcorn and the feeling of kernels stuck in your teeth. And that's going to conjure up real memories and feelings that an AI doesn't have unless it's seen those things written about online. And obviously that's really relevant to fiction, but it's also, I think, it's relevant to all storytelling, B2B storytelling, text storytelling. The best content that we write is when we draw on our own experiences and use empathy to put ourselves in the shoes of buyers. And I don't think AI has that kind of creativity yet. And I'm talking about maybe 2 years into the future. I wouldn't want to speculate further than that. But yeah, I think definitely we still have that strength as human storytellers. And I think we just need to maybe work a little bit harder to draw on those strengths and cut through the noise.
Yeah, and I think as you've alluded to too, a person's tone is missing. You're getting this kind of robotic output rather than a human's kind of tone as they would talk. And I know when I've experimented with the tool so far, it definitely hasn't picked up how I would potentially write, or the tone I would add, or the words I would potentially use. So I think there's a lot of feeding that has to happen in the short term to actually get a quality output. Mom, yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I actually read this article the other day, and I'm sorry because I can't remember the author off the top of my head to credit, but they talked about this idea of creating a barbecue content strategy, which is basically like if you went to a barbecue and there was someone sitting across the table from you who was an expert in a topic that really interests you, what are the things that you would actually want to dig into? And it probably isn't like those long tail keyword searches, like 5 key ways that you can you'd be like trying to dig into something really grunty and meaty. And that's what good content is like. It's about articulating good thinking. So I guess this barbecue content idea is really around good thought leadership. So everyone can create content based on keywords, but as Caitlin kind of said, only your organization can create content based on the unique perspectives of the people within your business. So while those people might still be searching those long tail keyword searches, the content that they find isn't going to move the needle on whether they work with you or not. What is going to move the needle is that really thought-provoking stuff. It might even be challenging conversations, the stuff that keeps them intrigued, that kind of big high level thinking. That's actually what people want to find online, or want to be digging into, and that actually going to draw them in. And I think in terms of differentiating, I might actually be thinking about collaborating on content. So maybe partnering with others aligned or in complementary industries or partner organizations that you work alongside. It's that credibility of ideas and experience perspective. I think it might even be, thinking about other ways to produce content, like interactive content, gamified content, not just blogs or ebooks or whatever, and really leveraging customer stories in a way that it really showcases ideas and examples through social proof rather than just answering a search query. So yeah, I think it's just kind of thinking about how you actually go deeper than some of this rudimentary stuff, that some of that real values-led, thought-provoking content that only a human perspective can kind of provide.
Yeah, cool. And then how do you think like ChatGPT and some of these large language model outputs is going to affect search engines like Google?
Well, I guess Google's role has always been to surface the most helpful, relevant content. And it wants to see the acronym EEAT, so experience, expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. So this is in line with the helpful content guidelines, focusing on that really people first content. So in other words, it wants to see that high level of knowledge in a particular topic. It wants to see your credentials. It wants information backed up by data. It doesn't just want to see like an understanding of a topic, but also that you've kind of got your own insight and perspective to share. So, I mean, it's not just about quantity and keyword density. It's like good quality content gets shares, so it gets inbound links. Your dwell time is better because people are staying on the page and consuming it. It's memorable because it's written in line with your brand voice, and your audience finds it engaging, using the right language. But I think these are all considerations whether you're using ChatGPT or using just like an average copywriter to produce content as well, right? So it's like it's just still about, it comes back to having that differentiated perspective, that EEAT, low quality content that isn't reviewed or edited or that isn't super readable. It's all going to impact the visibility of your site. And as we've mentioned, like AI is generally pulling from existing sources, so it can lead to pretty generic outputs and doesn't have that nuanced perspective. So I think if you've done your homework around that strategy and understanding user intent, and you've kind of checked out the authenticity and accuracy of what you are sharing, then like an AI tool is helpful because it takes heaps of the legwork out of doing it right, but I wouldn't be using it just for content's sake. And yeah, I know we're going to dig into this a little bit later, but it's obviously also around your priorities with content, so how you kind of balance that quality versus quantity and what you're trying to achieve with your content.
Yeah, okay, so extending that a little bit further, how do you see the role of content changing as a result of AI mix?
I think if you take content as the thing that gets people's knowledge to the next stage, whether it's down a funnel or any other sort of journey, what we're going to find is that people will turn up with, like I was saying before, a slightly better base level of knowledge, but probably a higher level of cynicism as well. So the role of the content that you're deliberately producing on the human side of your business is going to have to manage those two things at once. So less introductory stuff and more, okay, if you already know this, let's help you move along here. But like Monica was saying, let's prove that we know our stuff along the way. I wouldn't be surprised if we get more people interested in the data behind the opinions that you're publishing or things like that, because there will be a greater level of mistrust. Is this a hallucination from a machine, or did you really improve the speed, the clock speed of this server by 30%, whatever it is that you're working with? So I think that we might get to a point where, providing underlying data and talking with people less as beginners and more as intermediate level, but also discovering the weird gaps they don't know they've got in their knowledge is going to become more important. Kind of just trusting that that really base level is taken care of, but knowing that nothing else potentially is yet.
Mon, do you have a comment to make? No, I thought you were about to speak. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Okay, so let's switch tack slightly. Mon, what are some of the roadblocks you're seeing in delivering great content, and what tips do you have to overcome those roadblocks?
So I guess from someone who's more like an outside resource, so I don't exist currently within a marketing team, I'm an outside resource. What I often see though is a lack of buy-in or recognition of the value of content, which I guess can lead to a lack of consistency or cadence and investment, be it time or resource or money into it. And I guess maybe that comes back to that strategy conversation. So when everyone is on the same page with that big picture, like how does content support that or move you closer towards goals or objectives, and therefore what commitments do you need from people? And as part of that, I think you have to make it really easy for people to share their ideas. If you ask them to sit down and write an 800-word piece about a particular topic, they're probably not going to do it. But if you have a good roadmap of content, you give them a good brief and you ask to schedule a 15 or 30-minute phone call, and you have good questions prepared to kind of elicit the insight you need from them, then you make it easier for everyone to share ideas. And I do have a client who actually said that the value of working with a copywriter is that it's essentially democratize the sharing of ideas within the organization, so that you don't have to be a writer to have a good idea and share it. So they've kind of created this culture internally where it's easy for everyone to share a view and to put their hand up and say, I have an idea, because they don't have to get stuck in the process of writing it. But there is an expectation about, what they need. So there's, we're not kind of scrounging around for ideas and then it takes ages to get the process. So it's about having that, making it easy as possible. And I guess for a lot of people, like resource would be a roadblock. I know, having been a marketing manager in a bootstrapped tech company, that it was really hard. And so again, it's just kind of, balancing that quantity versus quality, prioritizing objectives, but also kind of helping everyone understand the value. And like Max said earlier, right, that it's not just like content doesn't exist separately to marketing or brand or the business anymore. Like it's a part of everything. But it takes kind of that joint effort. Like it can't just be the responsibility of marketing, the marketing function within an organization to get all those ideas, like they have to be surfaced somehow.
Yeah, agree. And I guess, Caitlin, from an insider's perspective, what are some of the roadblocks you kind of faced from, being within a marketing team?
Yeah, I've worked for several different tech companies, and I won't name any in particular, but one of the recurring themes that I've seen is a lack of alignment between sales and marketing teams. So, obviously sales, a big part of their role is going out there armed with the right content to persuade customers, but there's just not enough communication with marketing about what type of content they need, what messaging content should be using, what language their customers are actually speaking, what terminology they're using. So I think especially in larger organizations, that's a really, really common problem. And obviously there's no easy solution to it, but just making a priority for those two teams to come together on a regular basis to brainstorm content, to identify gaps, I think is really, really critical to make sure that you're using your content resources effectively.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So a debate that Max and I have had over many years is writing for SEO versus writing for storytelling's sake, and where the balance is in that. So not to open old cans of worms, Max, but maybe we could have a chat about that.
I'm very glad to be discussing this with you again, Caroline, partly because I've probably softened my view a little bit since you and I are workmates, but I think that, as Monica was saying before, we've got to remember that Google have always had the same mission, and it's to find the best stuff that people want to read about what they want to know, or to watch about what they want to know right now. And I've always believed that if you get too deep into the weeds of, but the latest Google update wanted keyword density to change, or they wanted to see an inbound link every 100 words, or whatever you've been told by your white hat SEO advisor, if you fall too far down there, you are not going to be paying attention to the core goal, which is create stuff that people want to find. And I do think that the key SEO message is always going to be create stuff that people want to find. Whether your story is something that people want to read is where the storytelling and SEO boundary comes over. If you are able to make your story interesting, and if you've got a good enough funnel or journey that people go along, they might not care about case study X 3 days in, but maybe after 7 days they're ready for it, something like that, then all good, get going with the storytelling. But we don't want to tell stories that people don't want to hear, and I think that's where SEO and storytelling cross over. Where we see some of the worst content being made, I think, is where people have done keyword research and they dive in despite the fact they don't have the amount of knowledge required to answer the question they've seen people are Googling. So if you're trying to tell stories because people want to hear them, but you're not the right person to be telling the story, I think that's another place where you've taken SEO too seriously and not thought about the story as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm going to stop talking now.
We could continue to debate this. Monica, what about your perspective?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and I always say, this probably annoys true SEO experts, but I reckon the best tool isn't a plugin or a platform, it's actually your customers, because they will tell you everything you need to know about what they're searching for, what help they want, what their questions are, and therefore like what words you need to think about when you're creating your content. And search engines prefer to see content in context, so where it's relevant. So to Max's point, if there's no point just creating content to answer your question if you're not the right person to answer it, and it's less about the frequency and the quantity and more about using that language really meaningfully. If you know your customers and understand their needs, then it's all going to work out contextually anyway. And I also think it's important to remember that SEO goes beyond keywords. It's about dwell time and bounce rate and the understanding user intent, so the structure and the sequence of content and all that as well. So it's that bigger picture stuff, where again, it's like if you're telling a really good story and keeping people on your page, it's all like there's no point getting them to the page if you're not going to convert them. So it's all about kind of this. I reckon at the core of it is good storytelling anyway, and good storytelling leads to good SEO because your customers. So while there's things you can obviously tweak to optimize, I always think the best way to do it is to just tell the most relevant story.
Yeah, okay, great. And Caitlin, with so many channels at our disposal, how do you know which content is going to work in which channel?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different types of content. Seems like there's a new social media channel every couple of months now. There was a lot of talk in recent years about people's attention spans getting shorter because of social media, but I actually think there's still a lot of value in really in-depth technical content. Research-based white papers are one of my favorite things to write for tech audiences, because you're actually providing value that they can't get from all of the regurgitated content that's out there. But if you were doing something like that, you'd spend a lot of time conducting the research, you'd spend a lot of time talking to customers and distilling that information into a really readable piece of content. But then it's also important to plan how you're going to distribute that piece of content across different channels, breaking it down into smaller pieces based on where your customers are, whether it's, you know, breaking it down into a slide share for LinkedIn or a video for Instagram or whatever, based on who your audience is. And then it's also, I think it's also important to note with social media that not all the best content is that planned, pre-prepared stuff. So I think a lot of companies, especially B2C, a lot of companies that do well are the ones that engage with that really live, spontaneous storytelling, right? And that means, you know, having someone who's a real confident product specialist who can be a good advocate for your brand, who's got the confidence to actually post stuff live as it's happening and engage with your audience in really genuine ways. So yeah, I guess the moral of the story is you want to follow best practices for the channel that you're using, where your audience exists. You want to create the content in a way that's easy for them to consume. But that's not always going to be stuff you can plan out far in advance. You know, you also need that flexibility to create real human connection, especially on a channel like social media.
And I'm just going to throw a random question out to all of you. And, you know, Caitlin, maybe you can answer this first, but which channels are you seeing right now that are getting the most cut through for B2B audiences? It's a $1 million question probably, but.
Absolutely, it is. And it sounds old school and boring, but for me, it's still LinkedIn. But I think that's probably a reflection of the type of companies that I write for. We're not about to be investing money in TikTok or anything like that anytime soon. But I'm sure if you were a young, hip B2C brand, it would be totally different. So it's just, it's a matter of knowing your audience.
Yep. And Max, you're nodding, you agree?
Yeah, like I have wanted to be cynical about LinkedIn for years and years and years, but it works. And I don't know why it works, but it does. And so again, we're a relatively boring company. We're quite infrastructural, but yeah, the place where we get the most shares of our content and not a lot of engagement, but the most engagement is definitely LinkedIn. And I'm constantly surprised by that. I wouldn't have expected it when I came into this company 2 or 3 years ago, but it's definitely how we're operating. And
Ron, you're nodding too? Agree?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think for my B2B clients that LinkedIn is the best channel for sharing content. But interestingly, I mean, this is maybe an aside, but I've seen a lot of my clients reduce their spend on paid advertising and really actually doubling down on organic, really good organic content. So just like investing hard in getting found organically and realizing the legs that kind of content does have as well. So where you can share it, how you can repurpose it, different ways you can break it down, use the same content in different ways. Yeah, all that kind of stuff. So I actually think that that's an important thing as well in terms of content, is how you can actually repurpose and redistribute and reuse without having to reinvent everything all the time.
Or necessarily spend lots of money, as you've just said.
Yeah, exactly.
So all got like really great organic, and being really consistent in that organic is paying dividends for some of your clients.
Yeah.
And mine. Yeah, and mine.
And I think like on touching on LinkedIn, what is the most powerful thing is actually individual reputation. So you know, that using that to build profiles of individuals within an organization, which I know can be a little bit tricky because you don't necessarily want to have to rely on an identity, but I think that that's where the networks lie. That's where the trust is built, relationships are formed. So trying to build better cadence with individual profiles.
Yeah, okay. Awesome. So I'm going to throw myself against the wall right now. And because the majority of the people on this call will be marketing managers or marketing executives in their businesses. So putting your content strategist hat on just for a second, Max, what's your biggest bugbear with marketing teams? Just the pricey version,
I've literally given an hour-long talk on this a number of times. The biggest difference between content teams and marketing teams, or the biggest point of conflict, I think, comes around to how long feels like a long time. Marketing teams want to move fast. If they produce something that is still bearing fruit 6 months later, it feels like a long-term campaign. content strategists are always thinking, what happens when the next CMS gets introduced in 4 years' time? So for me, the biggest bugbear would be one part of the company producing stuff, trying to get it out while it's still relevant, trying to, you know, milk it dry before next season, versus this other part of the company where every time something gets added, it's another problem that's going to stack up for someone to solve later. I think that that is getting better, but as we were saying before, content and marketing are working together much more closely now. I still think, though, that because not all content is marketing content, that blind spot from the marketing team is often the longest term stuff. In our company, it's the support content, the knowledge base, things like that, which can be leveraged for really good marketing purposes. You know, if you structure that up so Google can read it properly, there's some real gold in there. It's long tail gold, but it's gold nonetheless. But yeah, for that to be seen as marketing content would be another paradigm shift, I suppose. But yeah, it's the life cycle. It's how long counts as a long time is the biggest difference between a content brand and the marketing brand, I think.
True. And just to extend that example, I worked for a company who actually had their documentation on Google, and it was the highest ranking content that they had randomly. Anyway, Caitlin, what are you...
jealousy around that too?
Yeah, right.
You'll see sometimes, you know, if a help guide is outranking the product page,
yeah.
And you've got alpha characters in charge of both those things, it's going to be a weird meeting.
Weird meeting. Yeah, absolutely. Caitlin, what do you think? Hit me.
Yeah, another, I guess, a bugbear for me is, I think, as a content writer, when you're doing your job well, your writing should be kind of invisible. Like, good writing is kind of like a stagehand in a theater, you know, it conveys this magic and it conveys these ideas to the audience, but you shouldn't really notice the writing itself. And I think because of that, marketing teams tend to kind of not notice when you've done a good job. They often overlook how much time goes into crafting that writing because you don't really notice it in the same way that you might notice design or something like that. So yeah, I guess just a lack of understanding about the art form and what goes into it.
So marketing managers, take note, lots of love to the content people in your world, because they are spending a lot of time and resource in creating this awesome story. So thank you, Caitlin. And what about you? Being an external resource, what's one of your biggest bugbears with the marketing teams?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say marketing teams. Sometimes I'm working kind of direct with leadership clients, but maybe this is also where the whole AI tool thing is coming in as well, where people are like, this is so easy, like we can do it now.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, that's probably it. It's just, again, like Caitlin was saying, just recognizing the value of good writing, because there's so much more that comes into it. You know, there is understanding the storytelling techniques, there's the bias psychology, there's, you know, all that stuff that comes into actually what good writing is. Not just about good writing, but it's about good listening and about kind of understanding users and everything. So yeah, the bigger picture that actually sits behind good writing is, yeah, a lot more than just a few words on a page.
Absolutely. Okay, so like any marketer on our call today would agree, we're under the pump to provide improve return on investment on anything that we spend time or money on. So what's the best way to measure the success of the content you create? And I guess this is more relevant for Caitlin and Max.
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually read a CMO survey recently, which said that 65% of marketers don't know how to quantitatively prove the value of what they're doing or the impact of their marketing. And that didn't really surprise me at all, because I think, you know, there's so many different metrics. You've got traffic sources, click-through rate, impressions, social engagement, keyword rankings, bounce rate. All those things means there's so much data that you're trying to sift through and prioritize. And it can be really, really hard to know which of those metrics actually matter. Unfortunately, I don't think there's like a one size fits all solution. I think ultimately you kind of have to pick a few key marketing metrics or KPIs that that matter to your team, ones that feed into your higher business goals, and then work back from those to calculate your own success. And obviously there are tools that can help with that as well. Like a lot of content management systems have dashboards that you can customize, and then you can get that, you know, that information at a glance. You can do regular reports without needing to keep like a massive spreadsheet or something. But it's also important to remember that you can't actually measure it all, especially when it comes to B2B journeys, which aren't really linear, and things like brand awareness, which is just a concept that can't be entirely quantified. You know, it's not really possible to measure it and measure every variable that's led to a purchase. So that's just kind of a hard truth that also needs to be swallowed sometimes.
True.
One of the things that happens when you got so many different metrics and so many different analytics tools is you can pick anything and you can go and find a good story about it, or you can find a bad story about it. And the habit I'm trying to get into is, before we create something, deciding what we're going to look at. It can't be everything. You know, our blog is about getting in new customers, or this thing is about attracting people who have already got this product and not that product. Trying to work out which audience matters. You know, Caroline, you and I have worked on something where a good day would have been if the right 2 people read the thing to the end, and we'd make hundreds of them. And, you know, if it came back that 100 envelopes got opened, that wasn't meant to count as success, but it would feel like success. It's a big, cool number. So deciding in advance what actually matters for this content and measuring it on those standards, rather than digging around looking for the good story or the bad story. That's the habit I'm trying to get into, because yeah, you can drown in numbers and always find one that looks good.
Okay, so what tools support this measure of success, and what would you recommend we look at in the creation, distribution, and content too? So Caitlin, you work with mountains of content. What would you advise?
Yeah, in terms of tools, in terms of the creation of content, I'm actually using ChatGPT a lot right now. I think, you know, it's not there yet in terms of actually producing content of the quality that we need. There's still a lot of inaccuracies, repetition. As we've talked about, there's still that kind of recognizable robotic voice, especially when it's trying too hard to be conversational. But it is actually a really amazing strategic and brainstorming tool. You know, I think everyone on this call probably knows what it's like to have writer's block, and sometimes you get that at the easiest point. Like, it can be a really simple point and you just can't think how to put it into words. So ChatGPT is actually really good just as a conversation partner. You can brainstorm structure, headings. You know, you can ask it to generate lists of topics for your content strategy. And even if you don't use that information that it comes up with, it's often just enough to spark that creativity and get you going. Or it'll, you know, at least show you what you don't want to talk about, right? So I see it as like a really good idea generator at the moment. And my other favorite tool for content creation at the moment is Canva, which they're doing really amazing stuff with AI in terms of generating visual stuff for social media and blogs and websites. It's incredible now. You know, you can just type into a box and it will create an image of whatever you want, like a cat riding a bicycle or whatever. So gone are the days of actually relying on stock libraries of cheesy pictures. You can make things so easily. It's really amazing. And then for, I guess, the other end of it is tracking what you're putting out there, right? And I think you just can't go past the classic Google Analytics for seeing who's coming to your website, what pages they're spending time on, and also the Google Optimize tool for them running the A/B testing. And that's free. So it's a really useful starter tool for anyone who wants to test traffic to their website and try to optimize. And then if you want to go further down that road, there are loads of paid options, which I won't get into because it's not really my domain. I'm more on the creation side.
Okay, Max, what would you suggest?
Just to quickly touch on Google Analytics, I think we've got 1 month left of universal old Google Analytics collecting data before GA4 eats the world. Having worked quite a lot on our GA4 implementation, the best advice, and I'm glad we got it early, was to think really hard about the events, the user events that are going to matter to you. So it's less about setting up a great big bucket and every time someone clicks a button that turns up and then sorting through that stuff later. It's more about thinking, okay, which clicks to which pages are going to be most interesting to us, and building the system around those goals, which again is kind of like what I was saying before about deciding for each piece of content what's important as well. And in implementing GA4 in that way, we've gotten, I think, better at being focused on the things that actually matter rather than digging through a heap of numbers and finding the ones that look good or look bad. So yeah, whatever analytics tool you use, rather than just using it to collect and then inspect later, think from the start. What stuff do we want to know about when it happens and why? And then I think the tool itself becomes less important and the implementation of whatever tool you've chosen is going to be what matters.
Cool. And Mon, I'll ask you the same question, but from an external perspective, what sort of tools do you see or do you use to measure success and distribution of content?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because, to be honest, and I don't want to speak for all copywriters here, but I am often not really involved in that part of it. It's handed over and it's up to the organization to kind of decide whether it's a successful piece of content or not. So I actually often don't really have any insight into views, clicks, which, you know, I actually would love to know a little bit more. Sometimes it's just that simply that I just don't have access to it, because I think, yeah, it's an important part of that content strategy as well, right? Like what's working and what's not. But yeah, often I'm just not kind of given access.
Left in the dark.
Yeah. And I'm, to be honest, I'm not like a person driven by that. Like I don't love looking at data and clicks, but I think, like, yeah, to Max's point, it's about kind of going, what was our objective with this piece of content and have we achieved it? And so
some good advice for marketing people in the room who maybe use external providers like yourself is maybe to have that granular feedback loop, so you do know and you can then adjust what you're providing in terms of content in the future as well. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so we're getting to the end of our hour. Believe it or not, that has gone really quickly. So I just want to open it up to the participants on the call. Please turn your cameras on if you want and shout out, or just chuck a question in the chat if you've got one. We've got a few minutes left, so we can do that. I see that Kellyanne has asked a question around Jasper AI. Has anybody tried that or had a look into it? No, getting shakes of heads. Nope. Anybody else on the call? Nope. I guess that's a resounding no, Kellyanne. Sorry about that. Okay, I've got a question here from Dean. As content writers, how are you thinking about content that needs to be translated or transcreated? Ooh.
My experience with translation is a little bit dated now, but something I wish we'd built in earlier was not just getting the translation done by one dual language expert, but getting it checked by a second person. It's very unusual to publish something that no one else has read. With translated content, it can be hard enough finding someone who can, you know, read your technical English and put it in Spanish or whatever language you're after. You're so relieved it's there, you want to just hit publish. But yeah, the one thing I learned the hard way is to have another reader of that language look through it and give you very honest feedback before you hit go on it.
I guess that's because the content that might resonate in English may not actually translate word for word in Japan, for example. You know, a word that means something here isn't going to mean the same thing over there. So yeah, you could easily
if you're writing metaphors, you're planting landmines, right?
Yeah.
I should be clear, for us, it wasn't that, you know, anything was sabotaged. It was just that we had engaged a translator who had an unusual way of piecing some thoughts together. You know, everything was there, but the way it was described to me was that this particular piece of writing didn't flow at all, and it read, funnily enough, a bit robotically. So yeah, the most difficult thing, I think, is readjusting your editorial processes when you're not able to work in the language that you're producing content in. It's a stressful thing for someone who works with words every day of their life to suddenly not know what the words mean anymore.
Yeah, true. Caitlin?
Yeah, one of my colleagues recently experimented with using an AI program. I'm not sure which AI it was, but using an AI to translate something into a different language, and it did not work at all. Like, it's just not there yet. But in 5 years, who knows? These machines are learning so quickly, and I think as the algorithms get more sophisticated and more people experiment with translation, we could have an automated tool. But for now, as Max has said, I think having a native speaker go over it is really the only way to make sure that you've got that messaging right.
Nathan asks, how can video fit into content plans, and is it a great format for telling stories still? Nod from you, Mon.
Yeah, I love the way that video can be, not mute yet. Video can be repurposed really well and used in different channels. When someone has, and again, at that different stages of consideration, right? So when would someone sit down and watch a 90-second video, and how can you repurpose that into a 10-second clip on your social media feed? So I love, the way that you can engage people really quickly or deeply through the storytelling of video. And I think though it needs to kind of it's again understanding user intent and the user, like how someone wants to use your site. Where are you positioning it? When's the best time to try and how deep in are they before they are given a video to watch and all that kind of stuff. So I think being strategic about it, because it is a big investment to do it well. Obviously there's great ways to use social content now with like just mobile video, gets plenty of cut through as well, but to do a beautiful piece that you want to make sure that you're going to get return out of it,
life on it. Get the life out of it. Caitlin, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I think video is a really, really valuable tool, and I think a lot of people think that it's valuable just because of social media or because that's how people like to digest information lately. But I think it's also really valuable when you've got quite a complex product. Like sometimes it's just hard to convey a lot of technical information in a written format without losing people. So I think video can actually help you convey really complex ideas as well, if you've got the resources to put into something a little bit longer.
Perfect. Okay, we've got 2 minutes left, so 30 seconds each. In summary, what advice would you give to our audience today in creating a kick-ass content strategy? Max, going to you.
Start with what makes your company or your product different and unique. And I know we say that no matter what you're marketing, but rather than trying to sound like everyone else, work out what people can hear from you that they're not going to hear from anyone else. And then let all of your other decisions about how long things in, what format it's in, who writes it, all of that comes next after you know what makes your prospect different to anyone else's.
Cool. Monica?
Can I just say what Max said? I think, it's that foundational stuff, right? It's the brand voice. It's those messaging themes or pillars, that really clear USP positioning, having your goals, and how they link back to that overarching messaging architecture. So doing all that foundational stuff, because as Max said, once you've done that, all the other stuff becomes a bit easier because you've got that clarity.
Perfect. And Caitlin, final thoughts?
Yeah, agree with both Max and Monica. And then I would also add, just your customer should be at the heart of all the content you create. It's about what they want to learn, how they want to learn it, what story you can tell that's going to take them on that journey from, thinking about it to making a purchase. And then I would also add, I think as content marketers, we need to get really comfortable with the AI tools that are emerging, because they're going to be a fact of life no matter what. We can't sort of stick our head in the sand and avoid it. We need to adapt our roles to work to work with AI instead of against it.
Great. So thank you all for joining me today, and thank you to my great panelists. It's been an insightful conversation, really enjoyed it, and I'm sure you have too. So please enjoy the rest of your day. We will be sending you an email with a link to this recording, so please share it with anybody that you think might be interested. Otherwise, again, thanks for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.